then they're not going to meet the level of care requirement. So the government does have waiver programs where they waive that requirement, and you can get some Medicaid assistance for home care and assisted living. And as Brooke mentioned earlier, hopefully they're going to get a little more funding for that. One of the problems right now in the waiver programs is there's one called diversion, which is the one we seem to be running into most lately, which is kind of like a Medicare Advantage plan in that the carriers have a contract with the assisted living facilities and have a per capita for the clients that are in the assisted living facilities. But bottom line, for our talking, is many times those kinds of programs produce $1,100, maybe $1,200 a month. So if somebody's in an ALF, we have their income to pay for the ALF. We might have $1,100 from a waiver program if we could get them on it, and possibly up to $2,000 from the VA program. One of the problems with the waiver program right now is all that we can do is get our clients on a waiting list because it's not funded properly. And so this is something that I really hope the new law will help increase the funding for this, because this is dumb. It's dumb from a government standpoint, because if I'm sitting here talking with a client and saying, well, if we can get Dad into a skilled nursing facility, I can get the entire bill paid. But if we put him into an ALF, not only can I not get the entire bill paid, I can't even get you the diversion program till your name comes up on the waiting list. So hopefully the funding for that will increase in the future. It is possible to get both VA and Medicaid benefits in certain circumstances. If we have a single veteran that is receiving a full aid and attendance pension benefit and then goes into a nursing home on Medicaid, a couple things happen. Basically, he no longer has UMEs because his medical expenses are being paid by Medicaid, and the coordination of the two, his benefit drops back to $90 a month, which then becomes part of his patient responsibility amount anyway. So basically, when that single veteran goes into the nursing home, for all practical purposes, the VA help goes away too. That's not totally true if that veteran still has a spouse at home. We might be able to continue getting some of their benefits. Otherwise, if somebody's in an ALF, they have a relatively low income, we're getting the diversion program, maybe we can still get them some VA too to help pay the care. And I think I'm done on that one. Okay, I mentioned before that your homestead is a non-countable asset. That's true both for VA benefits and for Medicaid. One of the things that we like to think through, though, is what's going to happen to the homestead. We like to keep it as homestead because Mom and Dad may improve in health and move back. We also like to keep it as homestead because in Florida we get some real estate tax advantages for it being a homestead. We also like to maintain some of the tax benefits, the federal income tax benefits of your principal residence. Actually, since 2006, that's not nearly as significant as it used to be, because you almost have to have bought your home a good bit before that before you'd have any chance of having a gain on it anyway. But we do want to preserve those benefits if we can. Exemption of gain on sale and so on and so forth. But if the resident of the homestead is in a facility, are we going to have the homestead sitting there vacant? And if not, well, if so, we're not necessarily getting any money to help carry it, so the kids are going to have to decide whether they're going to carry the homestead, the carrying cost of keeping it. And if it's rented out, we might lose the homestead exemption anyway. Rental is a possibility because it would no longer be an exempt homestead, but now it would be a rental property, and it would be classified as income, not asset. And since you're not really going to make any income off of it anyway, it's really not going to affect things too much. But if you're going to sell it, now the patient has cash. And now we're back above the $2,000 of cash, so we need to think what we're going to do about the homestead and think that through. Vehicles, if we have some excess countable assets, we can buy a new vehicle. Even if the patient is totally incapable of driving it, we can buy a new vehicle because their caregiver needs a vehicle to get to the nursing home to take care of them, and so forth. In personal property, there are some rules in the DCF manual about certain personal property. Many times, even though I'm on a tape, I can probably say this, it's kind of like the recently discarded military test of don't ask, don't tell. I know there may be limitations to personal property, and obviously if you have fancy paintings and stuff like that, that might be an issue. But generally, the personal property is not a problem. Let me insert here something I forgot to mention earlier. And Brooke intimated at this when she talked about these things being fairly state-specific. And Medicaid is much more dependent on state law than Medicare. And it can be very state-specific. You know, I just want you to be careful if you're talking to friends or relatives that somebody advised them to do something in Georgia and it worked beautifully. It may work in Florida too, but then again, it might not. And some of the things that we're able to do with homesteads here might not work in other states. And there's other things that I'm going to talk about that the same would be true. So state-specific, it's also very time-specific. If you look in our long-term care planning guide, which is in here, or otherwise in your studies about long-term care, we had a Deficit Reduction Act of 2005, which was passed into federal law in 2006. Florida adopted it 11/1/07. It really substantially changed the rules as to how we do Medicaid planning. So keep in mind it's very time-specific. If you talk to somebody about something that happened pre-07, there was all kinds of things we could do pre-07 that we can't do now. So keep that in mind. Now I'll go on to say it's also region-specific. Florida has 19 regions of DCF that administer this law. And different regions seem to have a different attitude and approach. And generally, our region is a good region. And the folks have a good attitude of trying to help people rather than trying to keep people from getting benefits. So that's good news, but we don't know it's always going to be that way, and that's the other reason we want a good power of attorney. Because if they get sticklers for it, we want a power of attorney that allows us to do the things we want to do. One other thing I wanted to say at some point there is that, and this illustrates the difference that I was intimating between VA and Medicaid. If you're not allowed to have more than $2,000 in assets, well then it doesn't take long to realize, hey, why don't I just give it all to the kids? Now I'm destitute and I qualify. Well, I like to say that the government was born at night, but it wasn't last night. They figured that out. And